guys, my name's Stephanie. I am a certified herpetologist, reptile keeper, and enthusiast. This here is my friend Maynard, and you are watching New Light Reptiles. Today we are going to have an episode breaking down what is the best source of heat and lighting for your ball python. This tends to become a rather heated debate at times, especially in a world where there are just so many different options and opinions and different ways of keeping your ball python. But for me, I just like to focus on what is the most natural, effective, and ethical way of keeping your animals. In this episode, we're going to discuss what the best option of heat is and why. We'll also touch on UVB and circadian rhythms and or overnight heat as well. All right, so let's get started. So when setting up your ball python's habitat or enclosure, the first thing to keep in mind is that these are ectotherms. So these are creatures that rely on their environment to regulate their body temperature. Therefore, we need to create a gradient in their enclosure. So there needs to be a warm side and a cool side. The way that we're going to do that is through providing a heat source. That heat source will need to be placed on one end of the enclosure, and there are a lot of options, things such as regular basking bulbs, heat mats, ceramic heat emitters, deep heat projectors, halogen bulbs, etc., etc. In order to figure out what that best option is going to be, we need to understand what heat is first. Heat is a source of energy called infrared, and there are also different types of infrared. First, there is infrared A, which is going to be the strongest source. Infrared A is capable of penetrating through the dermal layer and or your animal's skin, therefore warming your animal more effectively and also providing them that energy source that they need a little bit more efficiently as well. Infrared A can be found obviously in the sun, and then also different sources like a halogen bulb or a deep heat projector. The second one is infrared B, which is a little bit weaker than infrared A, but it is still considered a quality source of heat. It just does not penetrate quite as well or warm your animal as well. This is also found in the sun and different types of heat bulbs. Infrared C is going to be your weakest form. It does not penetrate past the dermal layer, and this is considered to be more of a radiant heat source, so something like a rock sitting in the sunlight giving off those wavelengths of heat would be considered infrared C. Also, this would be something like your heat mat or heat rock. Now, with all this being said, this is the main reason why I really advocate for overhead heating for your snakes, using sources like a halogen, which is the #1 top best source of infrared A for your reptile, and just avoiding the heat mats. The heat mats really are not a great main source of heat for your snake. They will have to sit on it for a long period of time in order to warm up and get the energy that they need. It's not penetrating through that dermal layer, so it's just not a good source. Heat mats also tend to really malfunction if you don't have it set on a thermostat, especially. It can burn your snake. Where are you going, Maynard? He is up to mischief. They can burn your animal. And heat rocks especially, just please stay away from those because those are the most evil of all. Another thing to mention about the heat mats is they're not going to contribute to the overall ambient temperature of your enclosure. So it's not going to really create that gradient that you need. Now, heat mats can come in handy in some ways when used with a thermostat. You can use it to provide a little bit of belly heat. So if you're putting it under an enclosure with a thick amount of substrate to perhaps warm up a warm hide or something like that, that's okay if you want that as an additional source. But what I like to do is I like to use my overhead heating and then put a piece of slate or a flat rock under that overhead heating and therefore creating that belly heat. Okay, so let's look at some bulbs then for our overhead heating. Halogens, as I mentioned before, are king. They are the best source of that infrared, infrared A. That's what I use for Maynard. We have two 100-watt Arcadia infrared bulbs for him, and then his UVB. Another good source is a deep heat projector. That's going to be a little bit less infrared A, but it does have some in it. Ceramic heat emitters, unfortunately, they are going to be mainly infrared C, so it is not going to be as effective at warming your ball python. A couple other types of heat sources are going to be like your radiant heat panels. Those also are not going to be quite as efficient and going to be more generally your infrared C. A standard basking bulb is also going to be a little bit less efficient with a very, very low, if any, amount of infrared A in it. Of course, with any heat source, a thermostat is highly recommended. I also like to use my infrared thermometer gun to test all the surfaces, the basking spot, to make sure that temperatures are safe and up to par for Maynard's enclosure. Another recommendation I have is if you have your heat source installed inside of the enclosure, always make sure you're putting a guard or cage over that, because snakes will definitely climb and very easily burn themselves. Okay, the next thing that I wanted to touch on is UVB. UVB is rarely recommended for snakes and ball pythons, especially because they are nocturnal creatures. It's not really considered a necessary thing for them. However, there have been studies that show that UVB is beneficial for all reptiles. So I personally like to provide the best optimal care for my animals, and just having that there for them, I think, is better than not. So I do use an Arcadia shade dweller for my ball pythons, and I do see them out basking from time to time, and therefore absorbing that UVB, and that is just going to be more beneficial for him in the long run. Okay, the last topic that I wanted to discuss was nighttime heat sources. So there is a concern about keeping your ball python warm overnight. It is good for their overall well-being to experience a temperature drop at night. That's something that they would experience in the wild, and it is healthy for them. Now, if your home does drop below 68 degrees, or you have like a baby ball python, then you might want to consider a source of overnight heat. My recommendation would be a deep heat projector. Those are going to produce that IRA. They don't emit any light whatsoever, so it's not going to affect their circadian rhythm. Things that are usually recommended are going to be like the red bulbs or the blue bulbs. And though it may seem like a very small amount of light, your reptile can see it and it can disturb their circadian rhythm. So I just advise to stay away from that and go with something like your deep heat projector. All right, guys, well, that's all that I have for you today on ball python heating and lighting. If you guys have any other questions, drop it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I do put out weekly reptile educational videos, and I am a newbie here, so it does help so much. So until next time, happy reptile keeping, and I'll see you guys next week.